Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. Your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Email me for pricing, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. Today, we are discussing a gorgeous Breguet Type 20 Aeronavale. This is the 3800 ST, the watch that represents the heart and soul of Breguet, a throwback to an era when Breguet actually built mechanical chronographs competitively to win military contracts. The original Type 20 contract, defined by the name of the contract, not necessarily the name of the watch, dates back to 1954, and initially there were several different manufacturers: Auricoste, Dodin, Breguet. However, Breguet persisted the longest, providing the Aeronavale, the aeronautical arm of the French Navy, with flyback aviators' chronographs, continuing to supply parts and service into the 1980s. Through the 1980s and the 90s, the Type 20 segued seamlessly into a life as a luxury timepiece for connoisseurs of historic horology, and that's what we have right here. This is Breguet's Moonwatch. This is Breguet's Submariner. This is Breguet's Reverso. It is the one. And it's a wonderful alternative to something like a Rolex Daytona. If you've seen what those are being priced at these days, you got to take a look at one of these. Just as much history and arguably a better all-around watch. Now, the timepiece in steel is 39 millimeters in diameter. It's 14.8 millimeters thick, and there's two ways to measure it. Across the wrist, just the lugs, it's 45.4 millimeters. If we include the end links of the bracelet, then it's 52.8 millimeters and has a broad 21 millimeter spacing between the lugs. Throw it on the wrist, and I can comfortably say that you could wear this watch on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference. Throw it on a strap, and the same watch would fit on a wrist of 13 to 13.5 centimeters circumference. Although it's not a thin watch, it does have a rather dramatically sloped sapphire and bezel, so it wears thinner than you'd think, and it will slide underneath cuffs. This is a watch that could be your dress watch. It's a watch that could also be your sports watch. It's certainly good at both. And the timepiece includes an impressive bracelet that has broad but relatively short links, and many of them, so it has a silky feel on the wrist. You can also see it vents well on a hot day, and unlike a lot of aviation-themed watches, this watch does feature a screw-down crown and 100-meter water resistance, so venting out moisture is a realistic prospect. Here we have a snap-shut, friction-fit, single-fold deployant clasp. We roll back to the case. We see the characteristic Breguet teardrop-style lugs, case coining. The bezel is an aviator's bezel, so it moves in both directions. So it's not a dive bezel, but you can use it for timing, and that's handy. You have the chronograph, and then you have the bezel, and you can use both of them in parallel. The chronograph, too, is a flyback chronograph, so as you may use in aviation to time events that occur in rapid succession, you reset and restart without first having to stop the chrono. You'll also note it's a big eye chrono, meaning the minutes register is bigger than the other two registers because it's more important. Taking a quick look at the lume here, you can see what we've got is a factory tritium dial that fades relatively quickly, and then we've got Luminova replacement hands from down the line. So this is an original factory tritium dial. The Luminova hands at some point were replaced by the factory, but the dial itself is intact. Hands tend to be a service item, especially on chronographs, especially on flyback chronographs, because keeping them stuck when they deal with this level of acceleration and this level of violence is often a challenge as hands age. So it is typical to replace hands over time, particularly on chronographs. This watch has an exhilarating blue metallic dial, and it's iridescent. It has a little bit of chatoyancy. It almost has some depth to it. It's very, very, very special. And it's also important to note that inside we have one of the great chronograph movements of all time. This is a Lemania 1350 doing business as the Breguet 582. So it's an automatic winder with a 45 to 48 hour power reserve. It beats away at 8 beats per second. It is a 25 joule movement. It is one of the finest cam lateral clutch chronographs ever made. And of course, it has that flyback capability. It is very tough. It is very precise, and it can be adjusted to run chronometer spec with ease. This is truly one of the great movements of all time. It's not an haute horlogerie movement, but it is one of the finest chronographs ever made. If we're talking about engineering and not embellishment, this is as good as it gets. This is a watch that has so much to offer, and in an era when people are paying over $40,000 for steel Rolex Daytonas, it behooves you to consider something that has just as much historical street cred and real heritage behind it from a smaller, less heralded brand. This is the Breguet Type 20 flyback chronograph. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.